So after we heard about the negotiation process with the two tiers, and there's a lot of very interesting politics and negotiation games probably going on in the duration of 3 years that it took Israel to sign this agreement, and we can hear more about it from Ishai Donichia. I would like to first introduce the panel of speakers and to thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts with us. And the aim of this roundtable would be to examine the impact of the Open Skies Agreement after 5 years. So we're in the middle. This is just, the agreement has just reached its fullest operational mode of this gradual opening of the sky. And I think we already had some glimpse of good data about what happened in those past 5 years. So we're going to, the speakers would address this issue, and I've ordered them by alphabetic order, and we'll have a good mix from an economic perspective, geographic perspective, political perspectives, and two civil servants from Ministry of Tourism and the Civil Aviation Authority. So first we'll address Professor Nicole Adler, the Head of Department of Operations, Research and Operation Management in the School of Business Administration at the Hebrew University here. And Professor Adler did a research, it was 5 years ago, about the prospects of what are the scenarios to take place when the Open Skies Agreement materialize. And we have the opportunity to hear whether the forecasts actually materialize. So I think from an academic perspective, this is, we always say we don't have the crystal ball, but let's see how it works out. So, Nicole, please.
Can you just tell me how to put it on the slides?
I will put it forward. Just identify yours.
Like
that one.
Yes.
אלישבע? מרקו? איך מפעילים אותו? In the meanwhile, I will ask the newcomers to please sign your name and emails. This is for the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung regulations that we heard the explanation was beforehand. Your emails would not be used for any purpose other than the organization itself. So the ones who haven't signed yet, please just sign the sheet that we will fill your name and your email.
Okay, I think it's going to turn up at some point. So, good evening. My name is Nicole. It's nice to meet you. I very much sincerely apologize that I couldn't be here in the first session because I was teaching, and unfortunately we have to do that on occasion. And therefore I don't exactly know what was said. I can guess. Did you try computer? And that didn't work, so try video. Perfect. Or not. Okay. So I'm actually at the School of Business, which means that I mostly do things with applied math to the field of business, and this includes a reasonable amount of game theory. So we were kind of excited to be invited to discuss what should be Israel's policy in terms of aviation. And this was back in 2011 when there were already the discussions, but nothing had really been decided. Okay, perfect, thank you. So at that point in time, there were a whole bunch of agreements. They were bilateral agreements between Israel and the countries across Europe and around the world. And bilaterals can run from anything, okay? They can be extremely restrictive, and they can specify which airline on each side of the country is allowed to serve the market, which airports it's allowed to serve. They could specify the capacity, the number of seats that are allowed to be sold, and even down to pricing, and set double approval or double disapproval agreements. So open skies is kind of a US idea, and they've been pushing it for a long time now, and they're like king of open skies policies. They've over 100 of them today. And so obviously Israel was thinking about whether to sign this agreement with the whole of Europe. And this was after Morocco had already signed the agreement in 2005-06, somewhere around there. So they were asking, the Civil Aviation Authority was kind of asking whether this was a good idea. And in terms of consumers, there was enough evidence from other open skies agreements that it was generally a positive thing. So on average, it reduces fare levels. But that's still, of course, on average. So if you live in the middle of nowhere, and you have what's called a thin market with low demand, then your prices could easily go up once you deregulate a market, unless there's some sort of subsidies. And so there are a whole lot of subsidies. It's called the public service obligations across Europe. Norway is the leader of it with like over 270 PSO routes. So they spend hundreds of millions of euros every year on this story. But overall, it reduces fare levels, and in Europe, it was estimated at around, reduced the prices by about 1/3. Say for the UK-India market, it was down by 17%. So you can see markets where it's a large impact and others where it's much less. In general, you see more new routes, and you see additional capacity on existing routes. 74% within Europe as a result of the opening of the skies within Europe between 1992 and 2000. And the traffic volumes also increase. Okay, a lot of that is explained by this new business model that only happens after liberalization, which is the low-cost carrier concept. So today we know it from EasyJet, and even Ryanair has started to fly here. This is an ultra low-cost model. And you can see in this picture, thanks to ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, how it's changed across different continents. So in Europe, in 2006, 26% of the flights were LCCs. By 2015, that was 41%. They're like the leaders. The Europeans are leaders in this low-cost carrier story. Where there's very little regulation, deregulation, okay, such as in Africa. They have the Yamoussoukro, they've signed it, 54 countries, no one implements it. The result is very low levels of LCCs. And before Israel signed this open skies, it was also very low here. But there's generally a downside to every open agreement. And to be honest, the downside here is it's less clear what happens to the home carrier. Okay? So it can be dangerous for the home carrier, because it has to deal with competition that it did not have to deal with before. Generally, they have a lower market share, but of a bigger pie. Okay? So this is what was unclear, was if we open the skies, are we going to endanger the 3 little Israeli airlines? But it's supposed to provide access, of course, to new markets, because now you can serve any point in Europe. It's supposed to provide improved access to capital, and most importantly, to be able to bring in world-class expertise, which is not done in this country yet. In Morocco, this is from a paper by Bernardo and Ferreira from last year. You can see here, this is the Moroccan demand, millions of seats. This is 2003, 4, and so on, in comparison to Algeria, Egypt, Tunisia. Okay? So countries are along the same place. You can see the impact of the open skies. The impact was actually sort of much more at the beginning, and then it's become relatively constant. And we have to remember that around 2010, Roland Morocco went broke. And the Moroccan government handed them quite a large, nice subsidy to restructure. Okay, so this is the two sides of this story. So for this conference, I found this lovely thing from Haaretz, right? 5 years of open skies in Israel, lower airfares, more destinations, and not enough pilots. Okay, so I understand you've already heard about this. And this is from Ishai's place, okay? You can see here what's happened in the total demand. This is frequencies, so total demand is white. The pink one are the number of frequencies by foreign carriers, and the blue here are for Israelis. So the Israeli carriers have grown in frequencies too, just not quite as much, and the market's grown. I have to move fast. Okay, so the aim of our research was to understand what could happen if we open the skies, to analyze the impact on social welfare, considering both the consumers and the producers. And we did a counterfactual. So we took the data from 2010, which at the time was the latest we had, and we tried to say, well, what would have happened if we'd opened the skies in 2010? How would it impact the story? And we ran a game, excuse me, whereby we had to choose which airports we were going to include in it, how many carriers there would be. We defined each carrier as something that wants to maximize its profits, and its choice were the airfares and the plane sizes and frequencies. And then we have passengers making their choice about whether to fly and with whom. And then we compared this across multiple scenarios. Okay? So the passengers we defined using something called a logit function. This is McFadden's work, for which he won a Nobel Prize, and it's absolutely brilliant. And it allowed us to create a market share game. So our individual travelers choose how to fly, and we can create the demand for the airlines. So here's what you can see as the final results of this game. Okay? The social welfare advantages by opening skies. And we looked at it, what happens if you have a single Israeli carrier serving the market, two, or you end up with no carriers whatsoever. Okay. You can see that it didn't matter which scenario we looked at, the Israeli market overall is better off, full stop. There was no solution that didn't work. We are far better off though with Israeli carriers, and preferably two. And so we are arguing that there is room for like a network carrier and a low-cost carrier that is of Israeli origin, and this is the best overall. And now finally, when we look at overall surplus, we need to understand that aviation is derived demand. People don't fly because they want to fly, but because they're trying to either do business or go visit family and friends or go on a holiday. Okay, so it has an impact also on the tourism industry. So we estimated the value of this Open Skies Agreement at somewhere between $230 million to $400 million per year to the Israeli market, okay, to the GDP. It was kind of a no-brainer. And I would like to make two more comments and then I will shut up, okay? One, indeed the pie did grow. And El Al, who flew 4 million passengers in 2012 and had 33% of the market share, has seen a lowering in that market share, but an increase of 1.5 million passengers at the same time, which is exactly what we said would happen. But the other two Israeli carriers are being hobbled, and they're being hobbled because the security that they need abroad is being provided by El Al. Okay, this makes no sense whatsoever with airlines that you want to compete. And there are plenty of examples whereby Israel couldn't fly to Luton. EasyJet can, but Israel can't. There has to be an independent security authority separated from El Al. And finally, we have this wonderful airport, and it basically has no competition, and it is beautifully exploiting its monopoly power. And we have a regulator who is incapable of pricing this product. And the result is a very expensive, unnecessarily expensive airport that also limits slots at least 3 hours a day. In Europe, airports with slot constraints have a separate independent slot coordinator. In Israel, no, that would be our airport. Air traffic control is produced separately from the airport system. No, in Israel the airport is doing it. Nothing is being done efficiently in this country. And the best way, of course, is to either improve our independent regulators, or to create a new airport which will compete, and then we won't need to regulate them at all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole. And for the ending critical note, and the next speaker will probably have a lot to answer to Nicole, and this is Ishai Don-Yiche, who is the Director of Economic and International Affairs Division at the Civil Aviation Authority at the Ministry, under the Ministry of Transport. And as we heard from Guillaume Aron, he was actually participating in the negotiation and doing part of the negotiation, and still managing the agreement with the EU.
And most importantly, our students.
And a student of the Hebrew University. Visitors, right?
Yes. Same problem. Okay, so good evening. I prepared the presentation beforehand, but I think you get the picture. Everything's great. The agreement is a huge success. Blah 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 blah. So I will go over, because I made a presentation. I will go over only some of the data that you haven't seen before, and then I will talk a bit about, I think, what is more interesting about the challenges to the future in the limited time that I have. So here you see the what has happened regarding the last 2 years in Ben Gurion Airport. In the green column is the overall number of passengers. The estimate for 2018 is 20.23 million, give or take. So we had a double-digit increase in each of the last few years, and it's actually, if you can see in the last few years, it has been growing in, the growth has been even larger. People keep asking me, when is it going to stop? Because now it become kind of an infrastructure problem, because in 2013, 2012, when we signed the agreement, people would say, okay, we need the agreement and we need the open skies to keep now. If you ask the Israeli Aviation Authority, they will say, please stop them from coming because we cannot deal with all these amounts of passengers. Ben Gurion has had a slide in all of the passenger satisfaction surveys, which they care a lot about. I don't know if you've been to Ben Gurion Airport lately, but they are now currently building a huge tent to facilitate for the summer traffic, because they have no more room anymore. And we are greatly behind in the aviation infrastructure. Again, I'm just going to go only for the slides that I think are more interesting. Nicole mentioned the low-cost model that is only been possible because of this agreement. You can see in 2013 the number of what we call low-cost or hybrid. There is not exactly a legal definition for a low-cost airline, but these are the airlines that are, let's say, you can say that they are low-cost. You can see the situation in 2013, you can see the situation in 2018. We have a new entry of Ryanair to the market in the last year, which avoided for various reasons to enter the market until now. A lot of the growth in Ben Gurion Airport will be because of them. So you can see that they are becoming a bigger and bigger factor in the Israeli market. Number of routes that are being operated between Israel and the EU all year round. You can see the very big jump in 2017, again, a lot of it because of Ryanair. And this is maybe something that one of our statistics that we use to say the level of competition is not the possibility, but that routes that are actually being operated by at least 3 airlines. These mean that they are very competitive routes, because once you have not 2 airlines, but you have 3 or more airlines, then you have as close as you can get in aviation for what we call competitive market. And you can see that, again, we have a very big growth. 23 routes between Israel and Europe are being operated by at least 3 airlines. Some of the routes, I have not included here the non-EU routes, but some of the routes, if you have told me a few years back that there will be such competitive routes, I would laugh at you. I don't know if you know, but in Tbilisi, we are going to have in the summer 5 operating airlines to Tbilisi. So, yeah. If there was until now, there was like an Achilles heel of the agreement, is the number of tourists. I don't need to explain why bringing tourists is much more important to GDP than the Israelis going out. Number of tourists until now has not been affected by the agreement. It's been pretty stagnant until 2017, which there was a very big increase. I guess my colleague from the Ministry of Tourism can explain what they did to achieve that. Israelis are flying like crazy. Really, we are the wandering Jews. And the tourists, we can see that there is a very positive figure in 2017. Of course, always the fear of that is that there are now a lot of talk in the media about the security situation. One mini protective edge or plus protective edge, and all of this figure can go down, and it takes years for the figures to go up again. Again, I want to end. I don't want to talk more about the slides. I just want to address a few issues regarding the challenges for the future. So if everything is so great, what is not great? Because not everything is so great. First of all, as Giora said in his presentation, the biggest fear, and it was like very, at the time in 2013 when we signed the agreement, there was enormous political pressure. Giora, I bet you remember, lobbyists did a lot of overtime that year. There was pressure all around the government, and strike, and it was a very circumstances that the agreement was signed was very unique, and I honestly don't think that in another government, or maybe even if it was 2 or 3 years after the government has been established, we would be able to sign the agreement. There was enormous pressure on the most powerful lobbyists and powerful political figures in the country. The basic thing, what everybody said, is that we can throw El Al down the drain. You're hurting the Israeli aviation industry, and we didn't want to do that. Now you need to understand that it's also a difficult situation because we don't have any control on the Israeli aviation industry. The airlines are completely privatized. El Al is, which is of course the one that we are mainly dealing with. We have nothing, no effect on any decision that it makes. To make stupid decision, we can do anything to help them, but if they make some kind of stupid decision, sometimes not knowingly. Aviation is a very hard business. No one intends to make a stupid decision. They can go down, and it's nothing that we can do about it. I have to say that El Al is doing far better than the pessimists say, and also the Israeli aviation industry. But if you look at the close figures, it's not all silver lining, because the aviation industry has enjoyed the best 4-year environment in the last 4 years. The jet prices were down, the GDP was up, a good economic situation. Things are starting to shift, and no one knows what is going to be in the future. And if I look at the El Al's profitability in these few years, of course, against what has happened in the world, against what could have happened, then I'm a bit, they could have used let's say, the fat years better. Security, Nicole mentioned about it. Security is a huge problem. I totally disagree with that solution. It's correct in the academic point of view. You say, how come El Al is doing security for their stay competitive? The price of establishing an independent security authority is enormous. It's a completely cost-benefit. The problem with security is not the structure of the security, is actually the whole security thing that was established in the 1970s was from another time. Part of the old bilaterals, when there was only one, there was no competition at all. The current Israeli security regime is not at par, cannot live for a long time, cannot live with the open skies environment, cannot. It simply cannot. and I can elaborate, but I don't have time. But some things need to change. It's a governmental policy. The governments need to start taking risks. I don't know why you need in JFK in the United States after 9/11. I don't know why you need a whole militia of, I think, 300 Israeli employees there in 2 airports in New York and New York. I don't know why you need it. Infrastructure. Yeah, I heard there is a different regulator for the Israeli aviation security. And that's also a problem because they do not understand aviation. And the best way to minimize risk is by not flying at all. And that's sometimes what happens today already. Last subject is infrastructure. We need to build another airport. We need to have the airport privatized and have a competition to the IA, which is a big monopoly. The government is working on it, and actually it's looking pretty good, but it will take a lot of time, and we are already behind in the schedule. Thank you.
Thank you, Shai. From the Civil Aviation Authority, we move to the Ministry of Tourism, to Mr. Pini Shani, who is the Senior Deputy Director General Tourism Experience Administration, and he can tell us about the incoming tourism, right?
Good evening. It's meeting 7 minutes. It became a very popular time frame for speeches. I hope to keep it, not take more time than that. I will try to continue and see, to show you how we try to implement this wonderful tool of the open sky that was given to us, and what we did with it in the last 5 years. I will show some concepts. Not necessarily I can pinpoint and say that each and every one of them are as a result of the open sky. It's very hard to say what is the reason for tourism growth, but I will do my best. So, as you saw it in a few occasions here tonight, tourism is blooming. Currently there is no available room in Jerusalem. Giro d'Italia was leaving Israel today, not part of the open sky agreement. But the hotels are full, and last year was a record year with 3.6 million tourists coming to Israel. It's still numbers that, compared to Europe or to other countries in the world, they have a lot to grow, but compared to Israel, it's a record year. The infrastructure not necessarily knows how to carry much more than that. I collected some figures on specific countries to try and demonstrate the impact of the open sky. You see Germany. In Germany there are 80 million, more or less 80 million people, and 80 million people leave in Germany every year. Still we have a lot to go to, with a little bit more than 200,000 people, but you see the growth is starting to peak and to be interesting. Poland and Romania are two countries that the number of flights from this country grew dramatically due to the impact of the agreement, and you see the numbers. Obviously, it puts us in a different place. We need to know how to deal with these people. We need to provide them with a good product. We need to know how to host them. Not necessarily very easy to do it. And the Baltic countries, the numbers are not very big, but again, we starting to see impact of the new routes, the new service from this country, and we hope that it will grow. Obviously, when numbers are growing, and number of the tourists that are arriving from various countries, it changes the perspective of tourism. In the past, we might say that tourism to Israel was very ethnic. It was either Jews that came here to Israel, or Christians who came here because they want to do their pilgrimage to the country, and lowering the cost of flight, and hopefully lowering the cost of the product itself in the near future, helps other market segments to arrive here. We see more individuals that are coming, less groups. obviously dealing with individuals on a daily basis is harder than dealing with groups. When you have a group, you have a guide, you have a bus, they take them as ships, and we have individuals, you have to somehow cater for them and allow them to enjoy the country, allow them to understand what's going on, allow them to drive the public transportation and understand what it says. Not easy to convince Egged or convince transportation to translate it to English, and God forbid, translate it to Chinese. Again, we spoke about new source of countries and new market segments. For years we spoke about city breaks coming to Israel. It's still very challenging to bring people from Europe for a weekend. Again, prices are not the cheapest, but at least with the aviation, the prices going down, it allows us to speak to the big players in the European market and allow them to market Israel, and allow us to support it with a massive campaign all over Europe and all over the world, and many other ideas that will support Israel and show Israel to the world as a normal country that can offer somebody vacation and not only a religious vacation. I picked a lot, as a sample of a lot. Those of you, I'm not sure that everybody, anyone ever tried it, but selling a lot, it's a challenge. And a lot is like a microcosmos. There are only Europeans coming there, and I think that it's a very good way to demonstrate what the Open Sky Agreement did to a lot. 3 or 4 years ago, during the winter time, there were around 4 to 6 weekly flights coming to Eilat. Very, very, very low numbers. It meant that at least some of the hotels closed their business during the winter time, or at least some floors. It meant that people were fired. It meant that running a business that you have a very high peak during the summertime and a very low rate of occupancy during the winter time, it's almost impossible. You see the names of the city that there were flights from last winter, and 37 out of them were operated by Ryanair and Wizz Air. Now, I myself believe that we should encourage not necessarily the low cost or only the low cost. We should sell the product as expensive as possible. And those countries are flying for many countries, not necessarily their own country, not Ireland or Hungary, and it shows us what it did to Eilat. I will skip the 20 million, I will skip Terminal 1. Future growth, some challenges. In few sentences, I think we will have to speak very soon about bases, what will happen when some of the carriers would like to open a base here in Israel. For us, it's a promise that they will be here for a longer time. It's a promise for a fast recovery in case of a security incident. Currently, we are struggling with that. Airport charges was mentioned here. In some way, airport charges and policy is something that we will have to deal with that. Ramon Airport was not mentioned over here, a new airport down in the south that we'll have to speak about, and many other challenges in the tourism aspect. I spoke to Professor Shuval before about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and challenges there are many more, and I will be glad to speak to them when time will be given. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pini. The next speaker was the actually initiator of the initiative idea to have this event on Open Sky. So Professor Noam Shoval from the Geography Department, who was a former director of the European Forum and now is the provost of the Rothberg International School.
please. And you also are the chair of the Statistics Committee on Tourism, right? And of course a researcher on European tourism and Israeli tourism. Please.
Okay, thank you very much, Maya. I want to start with this graph. You can see, you probably saw it several times today. You can see the outbound Israeli tourism that is growing as a result and might be close to 9 million tourists that are leaving. Now the problem is that when we have so many Israeli leaving the country, we have less Israelis staying in hotels in Israel. And therefore, the open skies, I will also start and say, I think it's a very positive agreement. I think it's very strategic for Israel, but I will show you some challenges. So we have the Israeli person nights in tourist hotels are really stagnating and is not growing as you have now better options to go abroad. And this means something for the periphery in Israel, and I will talk today about many incoming tourists, but it's very important to remember also the Israeli tourists that are living, and therefore hotels and regions and cities are suffering. Visitors to Israel are growing, of course, but we have to remember that we should not count how many tourists are coming, but also the person nights, how many nights they spend in the country and in hotels, because from the city point of view, from the regional point of view, this is more important than the number of tourists, which is important, of course, for the airport, for the Ministry of Tourism, for the duty-free shop, and for people that sell gas, for oil for, gasoline for airplanes. Now, this is not an Israeli issue, this is an international trend that people are staying for less time. And what we see here is that basically, and this data is without Airbnb about 2017, Airbnb is significant, so we certainly would have seen a higher number here. But the issue is that if we look at this graph now, we have almost the same number of person nights. Actually, when we see it, we see a great increase in incoming tourists, but actually in terms of person nights, we don't see so many tourists staying here. The problem is also that the geographic distribution of these tourists is also changing. It's changing because in the past we have a majority of organized groups. Now we have a minority of organized groups, and most tourists are individual, and this will be the future trend. Organized groups, for many reasons, have a more dispersed geographic dimension versus the individual tends naturally to be more in the big cities, Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. So all these trends are, on one hand, they are very good, on the other hand, create challenges. And what I want to show you now is to share with you some data. First, I want to show you some data from 3 surveys I tracked tourists on an international level in Israel, from the moment they arrive to the moment they leave Israel. And especially the surveys that just ended in November, that I led the academic part of it together with the Ministry of Transportation with the support of Ministry of Tourism, where we track tourists from the moment they landed in the Ben Gurion airport with smartphones until they left. We tracked more than 3,000 tourists and several hundreds of tourist groups. And this gives us a good picture. We only started to analyze it, but it gives us a very good picture. So first of all, you can see how the geography of various tourist groups looks on the Israeli map. By the way, Taglit is about 4,000 groups we tracked for 4 years. So it's very robust. It's tens of thousands of people. Organized evangelists, it's only 30 groups. Individual tourists, this was a pilot of about 50 people that rented a car at the airport. But you can see, of course, different geographies, completely different geographies in the country. Now, I don't want to get into a lot of details about that, but I want to show you the Ministry of Transport survey right here. It's about 1,100 people. And this, when I saw this at first, I was really scared, because you can see on the right-hand side the day activity, what those people are doing during the day. I have to say they are tracked every minute. The accuracy is, several meters, the GPS. We also got all the information, the socio-economic information. We know how they drive, where they drove, where they visited. It's not just blind tracking, it's actually like a social science survey. And you can see the night activity. You can see Jerusalem, you can see Tel Aviv, you can see Haifa a bit, you can see Eilat, because we only show here places with more than 3% of the sample. So what it means, and I was scared and I checked it, and it's actually, there's no problem with the result. It means individual tourists, and it's the same situation was with the individual tourists in this survey. This is a day map. They tend to stay in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, and are not really, of course, they're traveling in the whole country, but we know most of the money is through the accommodation, the dinner, the money they spend there. So this is a real big consideration. And why it's a big consideration? Because if more individual tourists are coming, if they're staying less and less time, they go into the main activities, and you can see people that stay less are naturally spreading less than people that are staying more. We have also, of course, your bias of business people, and we have a bias of visiting friends and relatives. I said we need to look at this data more carefully, but it shows you that the periphery, in the past, tourism was one of the tools for assisting the Israeli periphery. Today, this is also going according to the trends, and in addition, you can see here, for example, the difference between the organized groups and the individual tourists. The organized groups are giving a better spread, especially to the north, and the individual tourists, we see the two towers of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, and of course, this tendency is, the Ministry of Tourism is of course helping this by promoting those two cities. And again, it makes a lot of sense. You want to bring people in, you have to take maybe your advantages, but it comes with a price. Here I just want to give you the idea that the data that we have is very accurate, so we can analyze how this whole city of Jerusalem is behaving hour by hour, which transportation mode tourists are using while they're visiting, for example, Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, mainly walking. Okay, they use a local car, a private car, not so much public transportation. This was also issues of the Ministry of Transportation. Now you might say it's very good for the health of the tourists. It's also very sustainable, but we have to realize if you mainly walk, it means you are not spreading actually in Jerusalem to all kinds of sites. So you basically go to the Holy Basin, you go to the old city, and you create more, I hope you'll be successful and bring 7 million tourists, but then we'll have issues of over-tourism, of issues which are really of concern. And this will be my last slide. So the open sky is important in strategic development for Israel. However, as you saw, the internal tourism is stagnating, and some regions of cities are suffering from stagnation and decline. And I have to say, Birthright is a very, very important project, because they are basically going, because of the price issue and also because of other reasons, to those areas, which is important. We have to remember that we have to take in account, when we do urban analysis and regional analysis, the inbound, the number of tourist nights, and not necessarily to look only at the numbers. The shortening of the stay leads to concentration in the must-see sites. Policy-oriented, the policy in recent years was to concentrate on Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, and I heard, by the way, in the media, I think today, that now the desert is going to get more attention and other areas. Improved accessibility within Israel, enhanced day visit to historic cities. So when we talk about urban planning in Akko, in Nazareth, in other places, route number 6, of course, we have the traffic jams, so the tourists are using those infrastructure usually at later hours, but it means that tourists can come and go easier to other places, distances, not to mention the transportation, the train, which could assist in the future people to go from place to place. And also something that needs to be investigated, and we have here students, maybe you want to take this as an MA project. What will happen when the fast train between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv will start to function? It take half a year, 4 months, a year, it doesn't matter. It will function, and it will function sometime soon. What does it mean? The towers will remain the same. Tel Aviv will become the leading site in Jerusalem, a day trip for tourists. it's a big question, so I'm not suggesting not to have a fast train. I'm just saying it will pose it poses a question and challenges for the distribution in time and space of visitors and tourists, and of course issues of core and periphery of who benefits from the tourism. So we need to bring the tourists. It's very good. We have to ask questions. What will happen while they are here? We can ask the questions. The solutions are not always easy. I mean, we can take Catalonia or take other places. Tourists tend to flock to certain places, and it is a huge challenge, and it's not easy to change those trends, even if we identify them and even if we want to try to act here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noam. Last but not least, and would bring us back to the European perspective, Mr. Shandor Selikovsky, the head of trade and economic section at the delegation of the European Union to the State of Israel. Please, Shandor.
Thanks, Mia. Good evening. So, I mean, it's not easy to speak as a speaker because everybody's tired and looking at the watches, of course, but also because it was so rich in substance, and the very competent speakers before me have said it all. So I've also prepared some notes, but I think I will more or less skip them and try to concentrate on those possibly value-added niche that could still contribute to this very rich discussion. And I am following your advice, Maya, and I'm trying to group my comments related to economic implications, social implications to the extent possible, and also geographical implications. So, I mean, first, let me say that it's from a European perspective, at least maybe because we are bigger and we have some on economic issues in the past few years, it is very hard to quantify the actual economic impact of the open skies agreements with Israel. But there is an impact. It's more based on anecdotal evidences that we will try to identify them. But let me start with reading out at least a part of a statement by the Ministry of Tourism, actually, which was issued today, which says, in cooperation with the Ministry of Tourism, Wizz Air to operate a new route from Sibiu, Romania to Tel Aviv. Sibiu will be the 6th city in Romania to operate a direct route to Israel. In the first quarter of 2018, incoming tourism from Romania increased by 70% compared to January-March 2017, and by 165% compared with the same period in 2016. I know all the caveats that we have heard before, and I know from the experience of some European countries, including my country, which is Hungary, and my city, which is Budapest, that there are some constraints and limitations and challenges with regard to mass tourism, but nevertheless, these figures are quite amazing. So coming back to the economic impact from a European perspective, I was quite astonished some month ago when we had an EU meeting with economic councillors like myself, grouping the EU member states, and we were discussing about the past experience in the past few years in terms of economic cooperation with Israel. And then the Polish guy stood up and said, for us, the single most important impact on our cooperation, economically speaking, with Israel was the Open Skies Agreement. And we were all quite astonished, and he elaborated a little bit, and he said, indeed, our trade and economic ties are still not so important with Israel, but it is growing exponentially in the past 3-4 years. And it has to do with the fact that instead of one city in Poland, now 5 different cities are served because of this agreement. I could also quote an input by a Spanish colleague who said that, he has just left, unfortunately, who has said that in the past 4 years, 150 new tourists came to Spain, and he added, and I'm quoting, that the Israeli tourists are serious, looking for new experiences and high expenditure tourists. So they are absolutely welcoming the Israeli tourists, and they are representing the crème de la crème of tourism as far as Spain is concerned, and they are actively trying to promote Israeli tourism to Spain. I should add that, as I alluded to at the beginning, it is hard to quantify the impact on our economies in Europe of this agreement, because we are sort of bottoming out from a very negative economic period in Europe, almost 10 years of sort of critical crisis or stagnation situation. And this is not by accident that actually last year, 2017, was the first one in the history of the Open Sky Agreement, which actually produced positive impact, significant positive impact on the incoming tourism in Europe, because the economy is recovering. So we are hopeful that in a few years' time, maybe in 5 years, when we are maybe taking stock again of the Open Sky Agreement, there will be even more interaction in terms of economic in tourism and beyond that. But let me also add that it is not incidental or by chance that, for instance, in the past 3-4 years, cooperation between Israel and France, for instance, in terms of the startups and some innovative sectors like the health sector and others, has skyrocketed. It is also certainly not unrelated from the Open Sky Agreement that, for instance, in Hungary, the second largest group of investors in real estate are the Israeli investors. Certainly they could afford to fly to these places without the Open Sky Agreement, but I claim that it has its part in it. I should also add that I take shy all the caveats that you have put as far as the operation of the ELA is concerned, but I also think that, I mean, it's quite amazing that in these circumstances they expand their business and they have, from a loss-making sort of situation, they have come to a profitability. And we also hope that because of these new revenues and all that, they will also decide to buy Atlas, those Airbuses, not only Boeings, but we will see what happens. I see at least two challenging elements looking ahead. One is that I refer to also the security situation and the bottleneck that we are seeing on the arrival side of the Ben Gurion Airport, and we have been speaking about that. But the other issue that I would like to mention has not been yet mentioned today, and this is the environment and climate implication of the civil aviation. As you know, civil aviation was sort of exempted from the commitments under the Paris Agreement back in 2015, but the situation is changing. The news of the day in Europe is that we have slightly increased last year our emission of CO2, and the Commission is considering additional efforts, and I don't think the aviation sector can be exempted from those efforts. So I see a challenge in that looking ahead. On the social impact, let me just very shortly say 2 or 3 things. I think in terms of the people-to-people contact, it has an absolutely amazing impact, and my original home city in Hungary is one of those weird cities that nobody can identify on the map. It's called Debrecen, close to the Romanian border, and actually it's quite amazing how it helped my friends and my family actually that there is a connection between Tel Aviv and Debrecen now to get connected. But not only that my mother, who is relatively old now, will not have to travel to Budapest with a train and luggages, etc. We have also noted, and it is social but also cultural, religious if you like, that the planes are full of mostly Orthodox Jewish people who are going back to Debrecen and that part. The Satmar region, which was the base of the Orthodox Jewry in Hungary, but also the Szigetmaros, which was now in Romania. So, and also in Debrecen itself, there is a renaissance of cultural life, the synagogue newly renovated, etc. The point I'm trying to make that it has also an impact in such development, cultural heritage on the Israeli side, but also on the Christian pilgrimage side. So I see an important value added beyond what has been said also in this respect. And finally, on geography, the geographical implications, Maya, the third point you have mentioned. This is also for a person an interesting development coming from a new member state, so to say, but it's not new anymore, but anyway. That if you look at the map, there were nice figures, Romania, Bulgaria also, by the way, but Poland certainly, some of the Baltic states, Hungary and others, they have been major beneficiary of these developments. So if you like, the geography from an Israeli perspective of Europe has been enlarged. And as Emmanuel also mentioned, new cities are emerging on the map. And I think in terms of people-to-people contact, but also business and economic interaction, it will have, and it is already having a major impact So I think I will stop here. Thanks for the attention, and maybe there will be some further questions. Thank you.
Okay, so we had a quick survey from all the experts, and I would like to open for questions, but beforehand, maybe to summarize some of the main topics that were addressed here. So if to go back to the first panel and to the risk that Guillaume was drawing on the board, I think we can summarize, and let me know if I'm summarizing it not in the correct way. I think El Al is doing well, considerably, and the risks in the graph were not materialized. So the pie has grown, El Al share has shrunk, but overall, since the pie has grew, El Al has more passengers. So it's in a well condition, but the future we still have a question. Do we still have a question mark? Okay, so we have to follow that situation, because I think we can agree that Israel does need a sustainable national, not nationalized, but national carrier.
No, we can't agree with that at all.
Okay, well, so I'll let you have the comment on that one. What I also heard was that the infrastructure issue is one of the major problems in Israel, whether with regards to new airports, whether with regards to new hotel rooms. I'm not sure with regards to Airbnb. Pini, do we have any new numbers? Do we have any data on that phenomenon in Israel? Can we say, does that compensate for the lack of hotel rooms? And is it good for the Israeli economy? A week ago at the European Forum, we had a lecturer from tourist expert from Barcelona, and he was referring to Airbnb as a so it puts a challenge to the real estate market and to other, and to us Israelis as citizens in other different perspectives. So where is Israel is going in that direction. I was wondering, and I would like to hear your take if you have, is Israel different from other countries that have opened their skies? Do you see the same tendencies? Do you recognize the same phenomena and the same tendencies in other countries, or is there something unique about Israel? And maybe the gap between the outgoing Israelis and the incoming tourists is something that I would like to hear your opinion about, if you know, and if you have the numbers. Are Israelis different than other tourists, or exceptional in that sense? What would be your recommendation with regards to the social impact, social and economic impact of that agreement? And Professor Cheval has already illuminated to it. How do we spread the benefits more to the periphery? How do we encourage, do we want to encourage that? And if so, how do we do that? And the interesting note that was also raised here, and Shandor, you put an emphasis on this, on Israeli, Eastern and Central European connections, that we are discovering new worlds and reconnecting to our roots. So that was also an interesting phenomenon. But if you can also shed more light about the outgoing tourism to Western Europe, I think that also we see a big decrease in the price of flight tickets to over there, and in Eastern Europe we would see more destinations and more routes going that. That would be a good summary of the trends going on. And so that was my comments, and I would like to hear your response. And I would first like to open for questions among the panel. So if you have questions to one another or comments, or you would like to address anything that was raised here between the speakers, I would like to hear your comments. So we would again go in perhaps reverse order. Would that be fine, or would you like, Nicole? Would you like to? Nicole, would you like to begin, perhaps?
Can I ask? I'd like to ask Pini one question. Is that okay?
If Pini is okay with that.
Yeah.
the Eilat as a case study is fascinating, and to go from 4 to 50 flights per week is amazing. And I assume it's benefit to Eilat, but I don't know if it is. And it's costing our society 65 euros per passenger, if I've understood correctly. That's the subsidy we're providing to the airlines that serve this market. Is it like only if they don't get a certain load factor? How is it decided? Who's paying it? And is it in fact worth it?
Okay, so I will answer Nicole's question, and then I will answer your question regarding Airbnb. Definitely it's worth the investment that we are currently doing in Eilat is worth to the city, to the country. It's challenging. It's convincing airlines to fly to Eilat, not an easy task. It's a seasonal operation. It's a city that the cost of the product is more expensive than the competitors. And in many ways, coming to Eilat not necessarily has an added value compared to the competitors. The cost is divided between the government and the hoteliers in Eilat. Altogether, it's 60 euros per person. It's for each person on the airplane. Okay. I wish we can find a more convenient solution, honestly. I didn't find it. Somebody has a different solution that will keep Eilat from collapsing, because what Professor Chauval described, the less Israeli vacationing in Israel is impacting Eilat immediately as a concentration of domestic tourism, and you don't need all the Israelis not vacationing in Eilat. You need 5–10% of the Israelis that will not come to Eilat, and here we have a city with no income at all. 90% of the income of Eilat is coming from tourism. So this problem is lying on the footsteps of the government big time, and not even mentioning the 2 billion shekel airport that was built. What's going to happen with it? With no international flights, that remember the domestic flights do not pay taxes in Eilat. The only income that the airport has is from international flights, but definitely this issue of resorts around the world is challenging. I would say that much. When Ryanair's chairman or CEO, I don't remember his exact title, says that in few years' time he will be able to offer flights for free, it means that the income will come from subsidy around Europe and around the world. When we speak to them, it's common, everybody do it all over Europe, all over the world. And referring to the Airbnb question, I don't have the figures with me. Definitely for the short term, it's a good solution. It's a solution that allows people to stay in bed in a decent price. It's a solution that we know from Airbnb, not necessarily they give the right figures, but the majority of the community that rent beds for Airbnb are people that are doing it from their own houses. They live there, and once in a while they go out and rent the place. The majority of them, between 80 to 90%, do not make an income of above 60,000 euros, 60,000 shekels, sorry, a year, which is tax exempt. For the long term, definitely we'll have to look into it. It has to do a lot with the planning process of new hotels, how long it will take us to build new hotels, all kinds of hotels, 3-star hotels, 4-star hotels, and deluxe hotels, where they're going to be built. It's a matter of really adapting the product to the number of tourists visiting the country. But definitely at this time, Airbnb is giving us a good solution.
Maybe we can go according to the order. So, Michelle, would you like to address?
To ask?
To ask or to give comments and other comments on the presentations?
I'll ask Nicole why, regarding the side comment that you made, why does she think that there is no, to her opinion, that she thinks that there is no any need for local industry? National carrier, you said?
So the basic idea of a free economy and a competitive market is that there's free exit and there's free entry. And without having both sides of that story, then you don't have a competitive market. So open skies means that the airlines can choose which points to fly to, and they will do it according to where they believe the demand is. Airlines that are not allowed to fail, okay, then don't need to adapt to the new market, because they know that Gaffney and all the other guys are going to help them out when they need to. And therefore they can continue to be completely inefficient and ignore international knowledge. And we can see it just by the fact that the CEO's changed. So the old guy came from the marketing story, and he came up with UP, an airline within an airline, which there's enough experience outside to know basically doesn't work. Now we have a new guy, because the airline isn't doing great, let's be honest. And the new guy comes from the revenue management department of El Al, and so he's figured out that he'll close up, and instead he'll start with a basic fare and begin to join basically the real world. But it's only a start, and we don't have enough experience in this country to know how to develop an airline. So this airline is stagnant, and stagnant is not good. And the new aircraft they're buying are simply replacing aircraft that were 20 plus years old, that aren't used in the passengers markets anymore. And so we need outside experience. And if El Al can't get it together, then El Al shouldn't be subsidized to continue. And we should allow a new airline to develop and serve the market, because there is a market. And because we are willing to, we do have home buyers, we're willing to pay for people who speak Hebrew on our aircraft, and we feel safer that way, and so on. And El Al does have that advantage now, but if it doesn't know how to use it, and this is true in any market, okay, it's not specific to airlines, then we should move on, in my opinion. But on the other hand, I want to see an Israeli aviation market.
Okay, so you're not saying that you don't think there is a need for Israeli aviation market, you think there's no need for El Al as we know it today if it cannot develop
if it doesn't adapt.
Yeah, if it cannot adapt, then there would be basically the market will give to another Israeli airline. Because what you said basically is there are a lot of countries that do not have their own airline, national carrier.
Belgium, Switzerland.
Belgium has.
No.
Yes,
it belongs to Lufthansa. It's totally owned by
I'm talking
Lufthansa.
about the
Swiss. All I'm saying is there are many countries today without airlines. We might not be aware of it because they continue with the brands. Okay, but essentially many European airlines no longer have their own carrier.
Is Israel the same as Belgium?
So now we come back to, does the government need to have access to aircraft in certain times? And I'm not allowed to talk about this out loud, right? And what do I know? We have people here who know a lot more than I do. Okay, but that's the underlying question. So the government has a golden share in El Al, if I've understood correctly. It means nothing. I understand that it means that they must keep a minimum number of aircraft.
It means that the government has first refusal if they go below a certain number of aircraft. Regarding passengers, regarding cargo. Regarding cargo, they went a long time ago below the minimum, and the government did not execute its first refusal. Regarding passengers, it's 15 aircraft, so it's very low. So if they go down to 15 aircraft, then we basically go down.
Okay,
So just a small comment regarding what is different between Israel and the EU or Europe. We are an island, okay, in terms of people that arrive and people that leave. We don't do it usually by car through Lebanon or Syria to Europe, maybe soon, I think so. Of course, the UK, which was or still is in the EU, but still is in Europe, is also an island, but the difference is that they're very close to the continent, and there are also people that get in and out. And therefore, this is also creating a tendency for the concentration, because we have one entry point, main entry point. And I have another question to you, Nicole. You talked about the second airport. So there are discussions where it should be located, and some people that don't want it located, they have not in my backyard or not near them. So maybe you have some ideas what, from your point of view, the north, the south, where would be more optimal?
The sea. The sea would be very nice. It might cost a little bit, you see. And what we want is for the government not to pay for the infrastructure. We want the private parties to pay for it and run it, build, operate, transfer if necessary, PPP, I don't care. There's clearly a huge demand, Israeli demand for the low-cost carrier style. That means a very simple airport that's cheap to run, to match the requirements of the low-cost carriers. They turn around in 25 minutes. That's the average, right? I think at Ben Gurion Airport it's what, 55? And that's, I mean, London Heathrow you can't do it in less than an hour and a half, right? So the big airports don't match the low-cost carrier requirements. They need literally different types of infrastructure. And apparently Israelis want to fly and they want to do it cheaply. And therefore they need that kind of simple infrastructure which the private sector will be able to build much more efficiently than any government will. We only have to look at the beautiful Terminal 3 to understand that what we're building here is something very pretty, but not very efficient. It's round. It's, the slot. Okay. So Timna should have been a low-cost carrier style as well, and of course now it's over 3 meters and it's way more than anything that we need. So the question is whether it should be in the north or the south, and that's of course political. So that this, in the south, I've been on TV on this, they really, really want an airport. Normally, nobody wants an airport, right? Because it brings noise and pollution and traffic. Ah, yes, it brings jobs. Okay, and the noise in the desert, well, who cares, right? But we have a minor problem, which is that the army moved south over the last, what, decade, built a large number of bases around there, and they're never going to allow an airport in Netivot or somewhere around there. Plus, there's a far larger population in the north, and therefore it probably makes more sense from an economic perspective to put it in the north. And then you have the NIMBY story, because where the wealthy live, they want access to the airport, but they don't want the noise. And they're going to expend lots of political energy to try and prevent that. And so we need a government that signed an open skies policy to stand up and say, now this airport is going to go ahead. And it needed to be done about 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. There's issues with the air traffic control story. We need to, if we really want to allow more flights, we need a separate airspace for that, in my opinion.
I skip, I love the audience to skip.
Okay, so, yeah, please. There are two. You and her. Yeah, please.
My name is Mia. I'm a student in German studies. I'm just asking myself, and first of all, thank you to your reporters. My question is, how can we make an agreement or something, cooperation between Israel and somehow an Arab state? Maybe 5 years ago I was just a dream, but maybe in the local situation in the Middle East today or maybe tomorrow? How can you see?
My question is to anyone in the panel. It is, there are a lot of Asian tourists who don't have direct connections to Israel, and they fly through Europe, Turkey, and it's a bizarre long-haul flight, almost 13 hours, and it's also cheaper than the El Al flight that usually connects to some of the Asian routes. That's one question. But my question actually is that there has been a recent Air India flight from Delhi to Tel Aviv that is popular also in India and in Israel. But then there's also a lot of resistance from El Al, and a lot of Indians are worried that that will be stopped again because of the legal proceedings within Israel. And and I wanted to know what precedence that can take for Israelis to discuss with their newfound friend in Saudi Arabia, and if they can do the same by flying over Saudi airspace to reach some of the Asian destinations. And also, I think it's pretty promising considering that a lot of Asian economies are growing, and in the context of Israeli tourism, I think it will be very impactful.
Regarding your question on India, the problem, the reason a lot of objects, first of all, now it's a done deal. We had, it's the authority of the Director General of the Civil Aviation Authority, the guy that replaced Giora, my boss, and he approved the flights. The El Al claim is, and it has some legitimacy, okay, is that Saudi Arabia, they are flying over Saudi Arabia, it shortens the flight distance around, if they would fly to exactly the same destination, to Mumbai, because El Al does not fly to Delhi, it flies to Mumbai, it would be around an hour and a half. So it's 6.5 hour flight instead of an 8-hour flight. Consider the cost, consider the product you're selling the client, it's a huge advantage, and they claim it's unfair competition. They have petitioned the Supreme Court about it. Supreme Court was so impressed regarding the petition that he scheduled an urgent hearing 2 months ago to July. So we will have to defend our decision. We are confident that, again, we did a very vast economic study regarding the implications. I think India is a done deal. I think El Al understands that. I think that El Al is fighting, so-called, for what's next, because there are other airlines that will want to fly for the same routes. I'll give you an example. We have, in December, supposed to begin the most ambitious flight ever, direct flight from Israel to a Chilean airline called LATAM, very famous airline, very big airline, and it flies to Santiago de Chile via Sao Paulo. So it's going to be the longest flight and the most complicated flight. They would want to shorten their flight time by bypassing Sudan. So that's the next thing. So what they are saying is that there will be a tsunami, so-called, of airlines that will try to fly circumventing routes, and they will be in a problem, and we understand that it is a problem. Right now we are taking it on a case-to-case basis. We eventually decided to approve the Air India operation because El Al is flying to Mumbai, not to Delhi, and we did an economic study that showed that even if they are flying to Delhi, you need to fly backwards again to Mumbai, and we showed that it is 2 separate markets with 2 separate customer base, and it was our recommendation to approve the flights, and we stand by it. We were not involved at all with the discussions. Saudi Arabia does not talk to us. It's their internal decision, and we cannot. We would very much like to see Saudi Arabia and other countries allowing also Israeli airlines to overfly them. It would be a huge benefit. Unfortunately, it's not something that I can tell you it will happen in a year and 2 years, and it's way above my pay level and my boss's pay level. So we do not know. It's a problem. We will take it on a case-to-case basis. The law says that our first and foremost goal is to encourage traffic, and so that's what we're going to look at. Unless there is, if Air India were to fly to Mumbai, it would be harder for us to defend this because it would be a direct. Regarding your question, we cannot sign a bilateral agreement. I signed the bilateral agreements, I negotiate them, my current job, a country that has no diplomatic relations with Israel. So I guess the answer to your question, so we have some Arab countries that have, we have Egypt, we have Jordan, we have with these countries. We do not have, no. It's Jordan and Egypt. Turkey is not in our country. So I think the shortest answer to your question is when peace comes.
Short. Anyone else wants to address some of the questions? No? So I have a question with regards to what's going on in the continent and with regards to Brexit. And I think Yishai, right, we had some comments about that when we were talking. So soon enough, less than a year from now, the UK is supposed to leave the EU. How do you see Israel-UK relations? Do you think that the UK would remain in the open skies, EU open skies, and then for the Israeli open skies, or do you see any sort of negative impact of Brexit on this aviation policy?
Last December we signed a new agreement. We don't have a bilateral with the UK until now because what you call open skies agreement with the EU is actually a multilateral agreement with each of the 28 countries, Israel and the EU. So we signed a bilateral with the UK, which is put on hold. Basically, we have a brand new Israel-UK agreement, which is put on hold until the time the British decides what they want to do with themselves. So, so the number one option for us is that the UK will remain in the EU-Israel agreement. I got the impression that that's probably the least probable scenario. What's more problem is there will be kind of intermediate steps or provisional, and at some point in time UK will exit the Israel-EU agreement, and then we have an agreement in place that will replace that agreement. The problem with that is that EasyJet, which is a UK-based company, will then not have the rights to fly to, right now it flies all across Europe. And what's unique about the EU-Israel agreement is that it allows what is defined as European carrier to have traffic rights to any country in Europe. Once they're only a UK-based carrier and they have only the UK-Israel agreement, they will be only able to fly to UK. For that reason, EasyJet has issued, and they have the same problem not only with Israel but also with a lot of other countries. EasyJet already got an Austrian AOC. So they have an Austrian AOC, they already have a Swiss AOC. They're flying to Switzerland, which is not part of the EU agreement. Under its Swiss AOC, AOC is their operator certificate, it's like the certificate that. So they issued the Austrian AOC. Norwegian Airlines have a Spanish AOC. So the airlines have their own way of doing what they need to do in order for them to continue flying. Again, sure, there will be no interruption in the flights between whatever happens.
Well, I mean, if I may add, I mean, we wish all the best for our British friends, but it's a very, very, very tall order, and I think people are beginning to realize how tall it is actually to exit the European Union and to take it for granted that after exiting you can still continue with the conditions. What is really encouraging, and we got indications from our UK colleagues that they treat the aviation agreements along with free trade agreements as priorities, and they are engaging with Israel and other sort of priority partners to make sure that there is a certain business continuity after they exit the EU. But that having been said, there are lots of issues, technical issues of vast economic implications like security, like air control, and the rest of it that needs to be sorted out. And these are very time-consuming processes.
So if there are no further questions, I think we reached our time limit. I would like to thank again our speakers, all the speakers. Guillaume, you would like to?
I have a question regarding the tourism world. we saw a lot of information, many parameters. What is the parameter or the parameters that tourism industry wants to maximize? What will make them happy?
This is to the whole panel or to
I'll give two answers. The Minister of Tourism's policy is basically the number of people.
Number of people?
Yeah.
So everything that we heard about the length of stay is less important.
At this stage, for the Minister of Tourism, yes.
Okay, so if they stay 7 days or 5 days, this is secondary. The total number of people is that what we try to maximize.
Yes.
What Professor Shuval says, because he gave us information about lengths of stay and places of stay, Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, how surprising. And what is it that we want to maximize?
So it depends who is talking. If it's the Ministry of Tourism, you heard. If it's cities, they want to maximize. So it's a different.
No, we don't speak about the mayors. We speak about the national level. In the national level, what will make the government happy?
I don't know. You heard what will
Okay,
make the
so
government
now I
happy.
understand. It's the number of tourists.
From their point of view, yes. But I think it makes them maybe happy on the short run. On the long run, they will, when over-tourism effect will happen in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, then it will be a problem, and then they will have to recalculate.
So they are not intelligent enough to understand that they have to look farther and to say that just the number of tourists is not good enough, and we have to speak about where they stay and how do we send them to the north and to the south. They don't know that.
Obviously, we are looking to spread them seasonality and geographically. Currently, there is an intensive effort to first build the product in the southern side, in the Negev, all the way, let's say, from Beersheba up down to Eilat, and create another focus. There is an intensive effort to rebuild Tiberias. In some ways, the area of Sea of Galilee, the whole area over there. Definitely, we are looking into the spreading, as I said, the seasonality and geographically, maximizing the income from those tourists spread among different countries in the world. But as I said, if you ask the Minister of Tourism, the first priority at this stage is number of tourists.
How about Haifa? Haifa is also very
Among other cities, yes, and Acre, that there is a huge investment over there in terms of infrastructure. The Western Galilee definitely was developing new products in different parts of the country.
I think we will need to reevaluate in another year. I think we will need to reevaluate in another 5 years terms. Hopefully we'll see better spread and better length. But we also, I think, have to adjust to the new economy and to the new way of property. And we see Israel is doing the same thing in Europe, at least in the length stage. So thank you all for your participation and for your intervention, and I wish you all a good night.